The grand old man of Britain is dead.
Winston Leonard Spencer Churchill was British to the core. With his paunch, jowls, and rugged jaw, he even resembled John Bull in appearance. During his lifetime, Churchill was in the service of 6 British monarchs. He was commissioned in Queen Victoria's army in 1895. Later, as a member of Parliament, he swore allegiance to King Edward VII, George V, Edward VIII, now the Duke of Windsor, George VI, and Queen Elizabeth II.
Churchill was born on November 30th, 1874 at Blenheim Castle in Oxfordshire. He was the eldest son of Lord Randolph Churchill, who was the 3rd son of the 7th Duke of Marlborough. While Churchill was always thought of himself as a Briton first, he liked to recall that his mother was an American. She was the former Jenny Jerome of New York, before her marriage to Lord Randolph Churchill. At a ceremony in Washington in 1952, Churchill was inducted into the Society of the Cincinnati, made up of descendants of officers who fought against Britain. Churchill qualified as a descendant of Lieutenant Reuben Murray, who fought in the Connecticut Continental Regiment. Churchill commented at the time,
"When the event took place, which this society commemorates, I was on both sides of the war, between us and we."
Winston Churchill took the helm in Britain's darkest hour and steered a course through blood, toil, tears, and sweat to victory over Nazi Germany. The Empire's existence was threatened at the time that he became Prime Minister on May the 10th, 1940, and he undertook the task of marshalling Britain's poorly prepared forces for the war of survival.
He became the symbol of the determined spirit of Britain in wartime, of the courage of the British in the face of the greatest danger in their history. Their spirits were lifted to new heights as they shouted, "Good old Winnie," when he visited bombed sections of London, making his famous V for Victory sign.
But Churchill had known stony silence from his people as well as cheers. In the grim days of the First World War, people turned their backs on him after the failure of his campaign to take the Dardanelles. 250,000 British and Empire troops were killed or wounded, and Churchill was blamed. But years later, an investigation commission cleared him.
Churchill resigned from the cabinet saying, "I'm finished." But only a week later, he was in the trenches in France as a lieutenant colonel commanding the 6th Royal Scots Fusiliers. Not long after, when the Dardanelles storm had subsided, his old friend David Lloyd George, who had become Prime Minister, named Churchill as Minister of Munitions.
In this position, Churchill made great contributions to victory. But it was in the Second World War that Churchill, as Prime Minister, scaled the greatest heights. During the long months that the Commonwealth stood alone against the victorious Germans, it was Churchill who personified the refusal of his people to admit defeat. His was the eloquence, the indomitable will that summoned his people to their finest hour.
Within 3 weeks after becoming Prime Minister, Belgium capitulated to the Germans, precipitating the British retreat from Dunkirk. That operation was recognized as one of the most masterful evacuations in history. But Churchill saw it only as a colossal military disaster, and he declared,
"Wars are not won by evacuations."
the British Isles were in danger of invasion, a threat that Churchill met largely by bluff. When France capitulated, Churchill went it alone, rallying his people as they fought on to victory at the side of the United States and Russia.
Though Churchill was past 70 when victory came, he went on to new triumphs, not even being deterred by the defeat of his Conservative Party. In that election in 1945, Labour won, but it was not looked upon as a repudiation of Churchill's war leadership. He resumed the role he liked best, that of leader of His Majesty's loyal opposition. And in 1951, the voters turned Labour out, and Churchill again became Prime Minister. He was then nearly 77 years old.
Despite his age and 2 major strokes, Churchill carried on his heavy duties until April of 1955, when he was 80. Then, at the urging of his doctor and wife, he retired as Prime Minister.
He remained in the House of Commons, however. In later years, he seldom attended, showing up only on his birthday or other special occasions. On July 27, 1964, he retired completely from Parliament.
Honors came to Churchill in profusion. In the spring of 1953, Queen Elizabeth knighted him and he became Sir Winston. The Nobel Prize for Literature was awarded him in 1953, and his academic degrees from colleges and universities in the United States are too numerous to mention.
On his 90th birthday, November 30th, crowds gathered outside his residence in Hyde Park Gate and cheered as the frail old man appeared at a window. Thousands of messages poured in from all over the world. One was from President Johnson for Churchill, the first person ever made an honorary American citizen by a vote of Congress.
Churchill liked comfort and good living in the Victorian style, especially priding himself as a connoisseur of food and drink. Champagne was regular with his meals and brandy afterwards. While working, he often had a scotch and soda, American style, with ice at his elbow. When Lady Churchill was asked who was the most important member of the household, she replied without hesitation, "The cook."
He liked the quiet game of backgammon with a small glass of vermouth or a pot of coffee, rarely tea, at his side. Mere water he described as a bleak beverage. Field Marshal Montgomery once told Churchill,
"I don't smoke, I don't drink, and I'm 100% fit."
But Churchill replied,
"I smoke, I drink, and I am 200% fit."
In fact, Churchill's 60-cent cigars, his collection of hats and canes, his appreciation of good scotch and fine brandy and vintage wines endeared him to his people, who found in those indulgences a vicarious wish fulfillment.
Churchill was what most of them would have liked to have been or thought that England was. The rich Havana jutting from his broad mouth became the symbol of determined reassurance. Lord Birkenhead once said,
"Winston's tastes are very simple. All he wants is the best."
Upon giving up the prime ministership and the power he loved and had for so long, the old warrior returned to his country house, Chartwell. Asked if he had anything to say, he hesitated, then smiled faintly and replied,
"Yes, it's always nice to come home." In war and in peace, Sir Winston Churchill rose to towering heights as a phrase maker. He will be remembered perhaps as much for his words as for his deeds. During the dark days of the Second World War, Churchill called Hitler
"a bloodthirsty gutter snipe,
and Mussolini
a whipped jackal."
In the post-war peace, his references to
An iron curtain,
and
a summit meeting.
came into general use. Yet when he took his first school examination, he could think nothing more than his name to write on a blank piece of paper before him. He once said,
"I would make all boys learn English, and then I would let the clever ones learn Latin as an honor and Greek as a treat. But the only thing I whip them for is not knowing English. I whip them very hard for that."
In the Second World War, when a victorious German army stood threateningly across the English Channel, Churchill told a stunned Briton,
"We shall defend our island, whatever the cost may be. We shall fight on the beaches. We shall fight on the landing grounds. We shall fight in the fields and in the streets. We shall fight in the hills. We shall never surrender."
some called Winston Churchill the greatest man in the world.
Sir Anthony Eden once told him so from a public platform, and Sir Winston didn't contradict him.
As a matter of fact, there was even a trace of evidence that Churchill agreed.
A year before Churchill resigned as Prime Minister in 1955, A small boy was taken to meet the great man at Chartwell, Churchill's country home.
Unfortunately, when the boy and his nurse reached Chartwell, they were told that Sir Winston was resting in bed and that they would have to have tea alone. On the way home, the nurse turned to her ward and sighed,
"What a great pity you did not see Sir Winston."
"Oh, but I did."
The youngster had followed a butler going upstairs with a loaded tea tray. When the servant opened Churchill's door, the boy tiptoed in.
There on a big bed lay the master, propped up by a stack of pillows, reading through a mass of papers.
"Excuse me, sir," interrupted the small intruder, "but are you the greatest man in the whole world?"
Britain's leader glared over his glasses at the audacious child.
"Certainly," he said. "I'm the greatest man in the whole world. Now, buzz off."
Leading members of the opposition Labour Party admired him greatly.
Undoubtedly, the hour found the man. The man said in unforgettable phrases what people had on their minds. He inspired everyone.
So said Lord Attlee, the former Labour Prime Minister. Lloyd George, Britain's leader in the First World War, described him as a genius, but added,
"Unfortunately, genius always provided its critics with material for censure, and always has and always will. Churchill is no exception."
French President Charles de Gaulle, often critical of many men, said,
Well tried in politics, he possessed an extraordinary gift, which one hardly knew whether to call angelic or diabolical, for rousing the phlegmatic English as well as for stirring the minds of foreigners.
In 1963, President John F. Kennedy called Churchill
The most honored and honorable man to walk the stage of human history in the time in which we live.
Franklin D. Roosevelt, a great admirer of Churchill, didn't approve at all of his ideas.
Churchill has 100 ideas a day, said FDR, of which at least 4 are good ideas.
Told on one occasion that no great man would have changed political parties twice as he did, Sir Winston smiled. He didn't disagree, but he interposed this unique thought.
Anyone can rat, but it takes a certain amount of ingenuity to re-rat.
Sir Winston Churchill has a long association with Canada, both as an inspiration in times of war and as a traveler in the years of peace.
He remarked on his last visit, the eve of Dominion Day, 1954,
I have been all over Canada in my time. I have most vivid pictures in my mind of many places from Halifax to Kicking Horse Valley and further on to Vancouver, where I caught a lovely salmon in the harbor in about 20 minutes.
Then, 79 years old, he was to say on that same last visit, his voice troubled,
I do not want to make an engagement as to when I shall be back.
Sir Winston made many speeches in Canada, their first on a lecture tour in 1901 when he was a young man of 26. He was a newly elected member of the British Parliament then, already a veteran, and renowned as a correspondent in the Boer War.
It was the first of a long series of trips to Canada and the U.S., many of them for more serious purposes. He had a secret rendezvous with President Roosevelt aboard a battleship in Placentia Bay, Newfoundland on August 9, 1941. This was 4 months before his first official visit to Ottawa as Prime Minister.
More meetings with Roosevelt and with Prime Minister Mackenzie King were held on Quebec City in August of 1943 and again September of 44. After the first one, Churchill went trout fishing in the Laurentians.
After the fall of Hong Kong, Sir Winston spoke to the House of Commons in Ottawa and delivered a defiant review of the war's progress. He recalled previous perils after the fall of France.
He said he warned the French that Britain would fight on, whatever they did. The French generals told their prime minister that in 3 weeks Britain would have her neck wrung like a chicken.
Some chicken, Sir Winston remarked. And when the cheering in the Commons died down, he added, some neck. Then there was his tribute to the Royal Air Force that has stood up to great odds.
Never in the field of human conflict was so much owed by so many to so few.